pretend like everything pretty. Rape and murder, dust your shoulder, Gucci under these feet. Children raised by the internet, but mommy face well be. Daily changes, stranger faces every time I go to the city. Coronavirus, crime and violence, pretend like everything.
You're watching Tobago Tuesdays on the Now Morning Show, and we are continuing conversations on crime, having just spoken to ACP. And I think it was an interesting conversation, to say the least, because here we are hearing plans of course, a strategic plan coming off of the heels of a walk through in Tobago, and also lamenting a little bit of the judicial system. The intention is to now hear from our civilians, if you will, non-profit, non-governmental organizations giving some insight. But thus far, what do you feel is the resultant? I personally didn't get a clear sense of, yes, we feel that our strategy is working confidently, or we need to tweak it, or we need more support. I don't think that ACP gave a distinctive position, if you will.
Well, he said that it's working, essentially. That's what he said he's doing, and it takes time. I don't know how much time it takes. He didn't say how much time, and I don't think that he's in a position to be able to say that. But I think he was saying that, using the technology, using the other resources available, and they're still lacking some resources. They're still doing the work to try and see how best that they can combat crime. But it's a all hands on deck kind of approach where we need the citizens to play a part. So this morning it's beautiful that we get a chance to check in with CivilNet.
That's right. They are, of course, coming in via Zoom this morning. Xavier Edwards, the PRO for Tobago CivilNet, and Ms. Karen Bart-Alexander, who is a development activist and consultant, also attached to CivilNet, is joining us, or are joining us, so that we can explore the perspectives of the NGO that intends to pull Tobago together. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Now Morning Show.
Good morning. Good morning to your listeners.
Xavier, I want to begin with you simply because the perspective has always been for the people, from the people, if you will. Having spoken to persons on the ground and even beginning strategizing perhaps as early as February, further beyond that, I am sure. But tell me a little bit as to the current perspective of CivilNet as it relates to Tobago and criminal activity at the moment.
Hi, greetings again. Morning, Ruckus, and morning to everybody listening. Well, Tobago CivilNet's main goal is to just have a thriving society in Tobago overall in all the areas of activity, education, health, political activity, arts and entertainment, culture, all these areas. And naturally, crime, especially violent crime, creates a kind of disharmonious state on the island, which is so well known for that level of peace and comfort and safety that the residents and visitors alike could experience. So one of the things that we perceive as a big challenge is a lack of information in how to address dealing with the criminal activity and crime on the whole, both from a preventative method as well as dealing with it post. And that is why we are making efforts to bring more information, more awareness, more consciousness, not just to the challenge at the surface level of the activity itself, but the underlying areas that bring that about. And hopefully that would lead to a more aware, a more informed, a more active society, a more concerned society in bringing about that wholesome Tobago that we know and love so much.
A beautiful approach. It means then that you are strategizing from an education standpoint, at least at this phase, and I imagine that is where Karen comes into play as a consultant. Perhaps, Karen, you can give us some insight as to what has been discovered or unearthed thus far so that we know what we're approaching first.
Actually, what we have been looking at is the public health approach to crime and violence. We are convinced that violence is a preventable disease. And being a preventable disease, it means that we have to take a public health approach to it. Why? Because it is almost like an epidemic in our society. It is concentrated in all the various areas of Trinidad and Tobago very, very strongly. So, and also it is not just specific to Trinidad and Tobago, but it is also spreading it's all over the world. Violence is all over the world. So it's both an epidemic and a pandemic. It being an epidemic and a pandemic at the same time, we have to take a public health approach to it, which is an approach that is an all of society approach. It is an approach that is different to the criminal justice approach. The criminal justice approach is very much about punishment. It is very much about reaction to the situation. Whereas the public health approach is much more about prevention. It is about being in the thick of things. It is about being trying to ensure that we know what is going on at the very grassroots level of the society and in every sector as well, because crime and violence is not just a policing issue.
Right.
Crime and violence is an issue for all of society, starting with the education of the early childhood sector, is starting with the community, starting with the family, starting with the school, and all of the various sectors, the judiciary. So what we are attempting to do in CivilNet, we want to hold a crime symposium. We've been trying to do this with little support, and I must say that I'm very disappointed that we cannot get further along in our efforts, because in 2008 in Trinidad we started, that is another group called the Gaia Violence Prevention Peace and Love Movement. We began to have this kind of intervention for which we did not get continuing support. And we recognize that what is going on in Tobago needs the same type of public health intervention. And we are trying to bring it here. And we are hoping to get as much support as we can possibly get. Because what is going to happen? We are going to bring some serious experts here to help us. And they are not foreign people. We have Professor Ulrich Johnson, who is a Trinidadian who has done tremendous work on violence in Boston. We have Dr. Wendell Wallace, who is a Tobagonian, and we have Camille Swap. Camille is a Jamaican, and she has been doing some serious work with teachers and educators and so concerning child development and the levels at which we, how we deal with children at different stages of development to ensure that they are not failing, ailing, and misbehaving. So,
And Karen, let me
with
interject
that,
a bit. Because
yes.
you've mentioned the symposium and some of the experts that will be coming in, and I'll explore that a little bit more with you. But I do want to have perhaps Xavier can enlighten us a little insights into some of those challenges that you mentioned, or lack of support. Are we talking monetary support or the support of the people? Xavier, perhaps you can shed some light there?
Well, as Karen noted before, one of the things that we definitely want to do is have an all of society approach. Which means that we definitely leave out both the, as you said, protective services, but also the element that deals with policy making, the political element of the space. And when it comes to consultancy, conversation, but then actionable items, there's been a disconnect in between us and those we engage with at a political level to support an action, even though you might see the action words being used, the all of society approach, languaging, and speaking of the efforts to bring about some change. We haven't gotten the support from that element, really.
Understood.
Beyond conversations and then distancing, but we press on. We press on. That is the motivation that we have when it's a place that you live in, that your children you want to see thrive, even when you don't have that support from.
Well, at least perhaps
right.
not just now, because as you see, as the theme or the tagline of CivilNet is pulling Tobago together, it seems like you are doing what you can do in terms of the symposium, because you mentioned that education being that first step, perhaps, where you're going to have experts, subject matter experts come in. Tell me a little bit as to how that ought to be executed, Xavier. Are we going to have communities come out? Are they going to schools? How exactly will this symposium take place?
The symposium is going to be a one-day, whole-day program that will incorporate elements from all those areas of society that will be significantly impacted, not just education and teachers or even students, but the communities themselves, the protective services as well. And really to just share from and interact and get workshops going about that public health aspect of dealing with crime. Now, in 2015, that was the first time I really encountered that term, public health, because I was working at Citizen Security Program at the time, and the conversation was starting as the crime rate in Tobago started making a slight shift upwards. I don't know if you all remember, but the highest murder rate we've ever had in Tobago was in 2009 with 16 murders. And currently we are at 19, including Tobago experiencing its first quadruple murder a couple months back. 4 men were murdered all at the same time. And, seeing that now, almost 10 years later, and hearing the term used since then, I think it's pressing and eminent that we do the work necessary to inform people of that perspective, because as Karen so rightfully said, it's not just about the justice system. It's about those preventative measures in all areas, both in the school, in entertainment, in the political sphere, and just the family unit, even the religious aspect of it, and how people interact in church and those religious spaces, so that we have an awareness of how those underlying issues in the psyche,
society,
in the way of being, lead to the activity that we're seeing now.
Understood. Karen, tell me a little bit as to the actual approach itself. So beyond the symposium, what will be the takeaways or the actionable steps, or even the next steps beyond that for CivilNet Tobago?
Okay, but just before that, I want to add something to what Xavier was saying just now. And I like your question about the support, because the kind of support that is needed for this is support at the highest levels and throughout the society. And we need to ensure that we have the financial support, because that is key, that is very important. We also need commitment. We need to follow-up support, because this is not just about a one-day symposium. There are some follow-up actions and activities that must take place if it has to be effective. We are not interested in having a talk shop. We really want to see things implemented. So the actual symposium is going to give us information on the approach, what the public health approach is all about, how it is implemented, how do we integrate it into policy and planning, which is key. And also, it will give each sector an opportunity to identify the risk factors involved in their sector, the risk factors for violence, and also what are the protective factors that will mitigate those risks. And having done that, then we can look at having an action plan to put those protective factors in place. The action plan tends to be the follow-up work that has to be done with each sector. But and parenting, I must say, is the parents are an important sector that we are looking at as well. So it is about bringing everybody into the room and really educating them concerning the public health approach, and getting them now to look at how can we integrate this approach into our policies and planning and into our daily lives, even in the home. How do you integrate that kind of approach into the home? How do you deal with young people who are beginning to become interested in getting involved in gangs and so? Also,
Understood.
it looks at how do you look at the activities that are taking place. For example, every time we have a murder, there is need to look at how would that replicate itself in another place. what are the possibilities of this murder creating a vendetta situation, and where it is likely to happen, and who is likely to perform this vendetta, and those kinds of things. So it
Right.
is a very
Thinking forward.
kind of, right? And it
Karen,
is very necessary because we see that violence is really affecting us all in the society. And it is not just the victims, the perpetrators are also victims in a way of the same violence that they perpetrate. So we need to be very serious about it. And CivilNet is offering not to the society, not just the symposium. We are also looking at an anti-crime public awareness campaign, a deep campaign that will take.
And in that case, I think that it sounds like we're going to be checking in with CivilNet very soon once more. Because after the symposium, as you both mentioned, actionable steps and a full-on strategy will need to be rolled out. And we look forward to getting the insight on those activities. So let me say thank you very much to both Xavier Edwards, the PRO for Tobago CivilNet, and Ms. Karen Bart-Alexander, a development activist and consultant also attached to CivilNet, joining us this morning to give us some insight that we can use. Looking forward to those actionable steps and checking in with you guys at a later date as you too do your part in the fight against crime in Tobago. Thank you for joining us again. I know that we are definitely going to continue this conversation well beyond Tobago Thursdays, but for now we're taking a break. We'll come back with more here on the Now Morning Show. Stick around, guys.
But mommy face well-being. Daily changes, stranger faces every time I go to the city. Coronavirus, crime and violence, pretend like everything pretty. Rape and murder, dust your shoe.